Hello, dear listeners. I'm Jane, and I'm so delighted to have you join me for 27. Miss Marple and the House Where No One Slept, a Miss Marple story. Picture a crisp autumn evening in St. Mary Mead, golden leaves swirling along the cobblestones, the warm glow of cottage windows, and the long empty house standing quietly in the distance. Tonight, we'll follow Miss Marple's keen observations as the village whispers and mysteries unfold. I wonder, what little hint in a story always makes your curiosity tingle? Share your thoughts in the comments as we step gently into this cozy yet suspenseful tale together. Now, dear friends, pull your chair a little closer to the fire, sip your tea, and let's start our quiet stroll through St. Mary Mead. You won't want to miss a single twist. Chapter 1. Dawn and Village Life. The first light of autumn painted St. Mary Mead in gentle gold, curling mist drifting over cobblestones and thatched rooftops. Smoke spiraled lazily from chimneys, mingling with the crisp morning air. Shopkeepers arranged pastries and fresh bread outside their windows, while the distant church bells chimed solemnly, announcing the hour. Miss Marple, nestled by her own window with a steaming cup of tea, let her gaze wander across the village, lingering on a house long abandoned. Curtains were drawn where they had always hung askew, a curious hush around it. Villagers whispered as they passed, "The house where no one slept." Who had returned, and why now? The sun had risen a little higher now, lifting the mist from St. Mary Mead and turning the cobblestones a gentle amber. Miss Marple set her cup down, adjusted her shawl, and stepped outside, the crisp air nipping lightly at her cheeks. Her familiar path through the village was alive with quiet bustle. Mrs. Peters arranging her bakery display of golden scones and spice buns, the postman tipping his hat as he strode along, and children scurrying off to school with satchels bouncing against their backs. As she passed the small square, the chatter began. Voices low but eager, carrying over baskets of apples and bundles of firewood. "Did you hear?" whispered Mrs. Talbot, the grocer's wife, clinging to her friend's arm. "Someone's taken up residence at the old Witherspoon place. Right under our noses, and no one seems to know who it is." "Perhaps a wealthy relative," muttered another, fanning herself with a shopping list, "here to claim the inheritance." "Or someone hiding a scandal," added Mr. Higgins, the innkeeper, pausing to polish the brass bell at his door. "Mark my words, it won't be long before the village is in a proper flutter." Miss Marple smiled politely, though her sharp eyes noted the subtle nervous glances and half-smiles exchanged among the villagers. They all loved a bit of intrigue, but they rarely observed details as Miss Marple did. A footprint here, a hastily dropped glove there, small, almost invisible, yet often telling far more than a dozen conversations. She allowed herself a slow stroll toward the bakery, nodding at familiar faces, listening while appearing absorbed in her own thoughts. Inside, the warm aroma of tea and freshly baked goods greeted her. Mrs. Peters bustled about, wiping her flour-dusted hands on her apron. "Ah, Miss Marple! Just in time for morning scones. You'll need something to fortify you before all this talk about the house makes your head spin." Seated near the window, Miss Marple observed the usual suspects. The excitable innkeeper, Mr. Higgins, who could never resist inserting himself into any story. The calm, observant vicar, Reverend Berkeley, quietly surveying the room with a half-smile, and, of course, Miss Postmistress, who had eyes like a hawk and ears that caught every whisper. As plates of golden scones and steaming tea were placed before her, Miss Marple listened carefully. Each villager's tale, each speculation, was embroidered with small exaggerations and deliberate omissions. She noted who avoided eye contact, who spoke too eagerly, who laughed a little too loudly. The chatter, lively and comforting as it was, seemed to circle around one thing: the house where no one slept. Leaning back with her teacup poised mid-air, Miss Marple felt the familiar stirrings of curiosity, that tiny, persistent itch that meant a mystery was afoot. Something in the way the villagers gossiped, the careful half-truths and the anxious hesitations, hinted at more than mere idle speculation. Beneath the chatter, a story waited, one that few in the village dared to tell. And as she sipped her tea, Miss Marple's mind quietly began to unravel the threads. There was more to the house than abandoned curtains and cobwebs. Someone had returned, and someone, she suspected, was determined to keep their presence secret. Chapter 2. The First Clues. By mid-morning, the village had settled into its gentle rhythm. Children's laughter echoed faintly from the schoolyard, and the scent of freshly baked bread drifted from Mrs. Peters' bakery, mingling with the faint tang of autumn leaves. Miss Marple strolled along the winding cobblestone lane that led past the Witherspoon house, her fingers lightly brushing the wrought-iron gate as if seeking some subtle reassurance. The air was crisp, carrying a whisper of wood smoke and damp earth, a smell she had always associated with secrets waiting to be uncovered. From her usual vantage, Miss Marple could see the house in all its silent, eerie charm. The structure had been left to time, its once proud facade softened by ivy and weathered shingles. Yet today, it seemed different. The curtains, long stiff with dust and neglect, hung with a deliberate tautness. Somewhere within, movement stirred, subtle, almost imperceptible. A shadow shifted behind a lace panel, vanishing as quickly as it appeared. Miss Marple's keen eyes roamed the overgrown garden. The fallen leaves rustled under her steps, betraying nothing but the wind at first glance. Yet closer inspection revealed signs that life had returned here. Footprints pressed into the damp soil, a bird feeder freshly hung, the scent of something sweet and unfamiliar drifting faintly from an open window. All these little details, so easily overlooked, whispered of human presence. The villagers passed by, heads down, speaking in hushed tones. "I saw a light last night," said one, peering at the house as they hurried past. "A candle, or maybe a lantern," whispered another, clutching her basket tightly. Speculation buzzed around the place like persistent bees, some declaring a wealthy inheritor had come, others hinting at some darker intrigue, perhaps a fugitive seeking refuge. Miss Marple noted every word, every subtle hesitancy, storing each fragment in the quiet chambers of her mind. She paused beside the iron gate, gently testing the latch. It resisted, as though the house itself were protecting its secrets. Her thoughts drifted to the village tales of long ago, the arguments, the disappearances, the whispered warnings not to cross certain thresholds. Yet she approached with calm, measured curiosity, not fear. The contrast between the lively, gossipy streets and the silent, shadowed house deepened the sense of suspense. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine who might be inside. A troubled air, an adventurer seeking solitude, or perhaps someone entirely unexpected, intent on masking their presence. Each scenario unfurled in her mind, layered with possibilities, none to be dismissed. Miss Marple continued her walk, letting the path curve back toward the village, but her gaze kept returning to the house. It loomed quietly, expectant and enigmatic, a puzzle waiting to be solved. In the soft light of the morning, with the village stirring gently around her, she felt that unmistakable stir of intrigue, the sensation that a story, long dormant, was about to awaken. And as she passed the last stretch of cobblestones, a fleeting shadow moved again behind the curtain. Someone was indeed there, and Miss Marple, with her quiet, patient curiosity, would be the one to find out who. Miss Marple had barely returned to her cottage when a soft knock sounded at the door. She adjusted her shawl and opened it to find a young woman standing there, cheeks flushed from the morning chill and hands nervously twisting a handkerchief. Her eyes darted about the garden as though checking for prying eyes. "Good morning, Miss Marple," she began hesitantly. I wonder if I might speak with you for a moment. It's about the Witherspoon house." Curiosity piqued, Miss Marple invited her in. The young woman, introducing herself as Eleanor Hawthorne, stepped inside, brushing the damp leaves from her coat. Her voice trembled slightly as she explained that she was a distant relative of the Witherspoons and had only recently arrived in the village. She claimed to fear for the house, for its upkeep and, strangely, for the safety of whoever had moved in. Her story was fragmented, occasionally contradictory, weaving together old family disputes and vague suggestions of scandal. Miss Marple poured tea, the warm aroma filling the cosy room, the clink of porcelain offering a sense of calm. Eleanor's fingers hovered nervously over the cup, and Miss Marple watched as she attempted to compose herself. She listened carefully, noting every hesitation, every glance toward the window, as if the very house might be listening with them. "And you say you saw someone there?" Miss Marple asked gently, stirring her tea. Eleanor nodded, her lips pressed tightly together. "I think so, but I cannot be certain. The curtains, they move sometimes, even when the wind doesn't reach them. And last night, I heard footsteps. I couldn't sleep a wink." Miss Marple inclined her head thoughtfully. Footsteps in an abandoned house were rarely mere coincidence. She asked subtle questions, encouraging Eleanor to expand her story without pressing too hard. Names slipped through, dates became muddled, and motives sounded vague, perfectly ordinary details, yet each carried a hint of hidden meaning. They spoke of the villagers' gossip as well, speculations about a wealthy inheritor or perhaps a visitor with secrets to hide. Eleanor's expression shifted when she recounted what she had overheard, betraying unease and curiosity in equal measure. Miss Marple took note of small clues, an untied shoelace, a faint scent of lavender, a sudden intake of breath at the mention of the house's previous owner. After a while, Eleanor fell silent, her gaze distant. Miss Marple leaned back in her chair, sipping her tea slowly. She could sense that while Eleanor's story was true in some respects, it was deliberately shaded in others. The omissions, the evasions, even the nervous flourishes were all part of the puzzle. Finally, Eleanor rose, smoothing her coat. "Thank you, Miss Marple. I hope you understand. I just thought, perhaps you could make sense of all this, where I cannot." Miss Marple smiled gently. "We shall see, my dear. There are always more layers to uncover than first appear. Sometimes, the smallest details speak louder than the grandest tales." As Eleanor departed, a chill wind rustled the autumn leaves outside. Miss Marple stood by the window, staring once more at the Witherspoon house. The curtains remained drawn, but her mind was already piecing together the threads. Someone had returned, someone who preferred to remain unseen. And Miss Marple, quietly observant as ever, intended to learn exactly who and why. Autumn had settled firmly over St. Mary Mead, and the village square was a bustle of activity. Golden leaves danced across the cobblestones, swept along by crisp breezes that carried the scent of apple cider and wood smoke. Villagers hurried about, erecting stalls and hanging decorations, their cheeks flushed with the effort and excitement. Miss Marple walked among them, her eyes observing the familiar flurry with that keen, unobtrusive curiosity she was known for. Mrs. Peters, apron dusted with flour, fussed over her pie stall, arranging rows of apple and pumpkin pies with an almost ceremonial care. "The festival is early this year, but it must look perfect," she said, casting a nervous glance at the Witherspoon house at the edge of the square. Even amid the autumnal cheer, the abandoned house seemed to cast a subtle shadow, its silent presence unnoticed by many but not by Miss Marple. Children carried bundles of hay, their laughter ringing through the crisp morning air, while Mr. Higgins, the excitable innkeeper, darted between stalls, polishing brass lanterns and fussing over bunting that refused to stay in place. "Nothing must go awry," he declared loudly, though his eyes betrayed the smallest flicker of anxiety whenever he glanced at the distant, silent house. Even the vicar, Reverend Berkeley, could not resist joining the preparations, offering calm, measured guidance to the villagers while keeping a discreet eye on the festivities. Miss Marple admired his tact, noting how he soothed tempers and encouraged cooperation with gentle authority. Each participant in the preparations seemed unaware that the festival's cheerful bustle might serve as a backdrop to more than just seasonal celebration. The villagers' gossip, ever present, buzzed under the surface of activity. Whispers about the Witherspoon house floated from stall to stall. Some claimed to have glimpsed a shadowy figure in the window. Others hinted that an unexpected visitor had arrived with wealth or secrets. Miss Marple listened, letting the gossip flow around her like the crisp autumn wind, storing each fragment in her mind for later reflection. She paused by a small fountain at the centre of the square, where ivy and fallen leaves made a picturesque scene, and sipped from a flask of tea she had carried in her coat pocket. The festival's charm, hay bales stacked like miniature mountains, pumpkins gleaming in the morning light, ribbons fluttering above, contrasted sharply with the quiet menace of the distant house. Cozy, celebratory sounds mixed with subtle hints of unease, an unexplained shadow passing a curtained window, a door gently clicking shut where no visitor should be. Miss Marple's attention was drawn again to the village chatter, small details weaving themselves into patterns she alone could discern. A misplaced lantern here, an unusually tight-lipped glance there. Amid the laughter and bustle, the Witherspoon house seemed to pulse with secrets, waiting patiently for someone perceptive enough to notice. As the first visitors arrived, carrying baskets and umbrellas, the festival promised a perfect autumn day. Yet Miss Marple, standing quietly at the edge of the square, could not shake the feeling that the cheer and warmth of the village celebration might conceal something more urgent. The house where no one slept had returned to the villagers' attention, and with it, a mystery that was only beginning to unfold. Chapter 3: Secrets and Shadows. Night had fallen over St. Mary Mead, and the village streets were bathed in the soft glow of gas lamps. The crisp autumn air carried a hint of frost, and the faint rustle of fallen leaves whispered across the cobblestones. Inside her cosy cottage, Miss Marple settled into her favourite armchair by the fire, the warm glow illuminating the corners of the room. Outside, all was quiet, or so it seemed. As she sipped her tea, a faint sound reached her ears, almost indistinguishable from the wind rattling the shutters. Footsteps. She set down her cup and listened intently. There it was again, a soft, deliberate pacing, echoing faintly from the direction of the Witherspoon house. Her fingers, curled around the arm of the chair, tensed slightly, not with fear but with that familiar, exhilarating spark of curiosity. Miss Marple rose and drew back the lace curtains, peering out into the inky night. The house stood in solemn silence, its windows dark and unwelcoming. Yet she could see subtle movements, a shadow flickering behind a curtain, a faint shimmer of light where none should be. Her mind began to trace possibilities. Could it be a late visitor? Perhaps someone had taken refuge there, seeking solitude or concealment. She wrapped herself in her shawl and stepped outside, boots crunching on the frost-hardened leaves. The village was empty, the streets hushed except for the occasional hoot of an owl. Approaching the house cautiously, she noticed the small details others would overlook: the garden gate slightly ajar, a faint imprint in the soft soil, and the scent of something sweet, lingering and out of place. Each clue whispered a story of human presence, subtle and deliberate. From behind a window, a faint glimmer suggested candlelight, or perhaps a lantern. Miss Marple's thoughts drifted to past mysteries she had encountered in quiet villages like this, where shadows and sounds often concealed far more than anyone imagined. She remembered the small, seemingly insignificant details that led to the unraveling of even the most tightly held secrets. Tonight, those details were waiting to be noticed, waiting for the right mind to interpret them. The wind carried another sound, a quiet murmur, almost like someone speaking under their breath. Miss Marple remained still, attentive, imagining the careful choreography of footsteps across creaking floors, doors opened and closed with deliberate care, whispers carried along draughty corridors. Every element told a tale. All she had to do was listen. She retreated to the warmth of her cottage, pulling the curtains firmly closed but keeping the window slightly ajar to catch any further sounds. Her teacup had cooled, forgotten in her hand, but the thrill of observation kept her alert. The village slumbered, oblivious to the subtle mystery unfolding at the edge of its square. As she returned to her chair by the fire, a final, deliberate creak echoed from the Witherspoon house. Footsteps paused. Then silence. Miss Marple's lips curved into a knowing smile. Someone was indeed there, and the house, long dormant and forgotten, had awakened. She would need patience, observation, and a touch of gentle cunning to uncover who and why. The morning sun spilled through amber leaves as Miss Marple stepped out once more, this time with a purposeful pace. The village had returned to its quiet routine, though a subtle tension lingered beneath the calm. Shopkeepers arranged their wares with habitual precision, and children darted between stalls and hedgerows, yet every so often a glance or hushed whisper betrayed that the Witherspoon house still occupied everyone's thoughts. Miss Marple, however, was not interested in gossip today. She was gathering facts, small and elusive, that might explain the peculiar stir in the village. Her first stop was the neighbouring cottages, each one a repository of decades of stories. Mrs. Talbot, who prided herself on knowing everything from lost buttons to lost hearts, was eager to speak. "I did see a light, very faint, just the other evening," she whispered, peering over her spectacles. "And there were footprints near the back gate. Though, of course, it could be the wind or stray animals." Miss Marple nodded politely, mentally noting the footprints as a possible clue. The distinction between mischief and mystery, she knew, often lay in the smallest detail. At the corner, she found the postmistress arranging letters, her eyes sharp and discerning. "A letter arrived for the house last week, though there was no name," she remarked, her tone cautious. "I thought it best to wait, but someone must have taken it. Who knows why they'd write to an empty house?" Miss Marple made a silent note. An anonymous letter was rarely a simple matter. Continuing to the garden of the house itself, she observed the soil, disturbed in places where the autumn leaves had been swept aside. A scarf, fine and delicately embroidered, lay partially buried beneath a bush, its presence incongruous with the neglected garden. And faint footprints, varied in size, suggested more than one visitor. Each clue was subtle, almost imperceptible to the casual eye, yet to Miss Marple they painted a small, precise picture of activity and intention. She moved on to the village square, where she quietly conversed with passers-by, asking questions with the softness of casual interest. Who had arrived in the village recently? Who had noticed unusual lights or sounds? Faces brightened with tales or hesitated under the weight of withheld information. Each story, truthful or exaggerated, added another brushstroke to the canvas she was assembling in her mind. By mid-morning, Miss Marple had gathered a collection of curious details: an untied shoelace on a distant doorstep, a faint scent of lavender wafting from an abandoned window, a forgotten bundle of letters in the post office. They were fragments, individually insignificant, yet collectively suggestive of careful, deliberate activity in a house where no one was supposed to dwell. Returning home with her notebook tucked securely in her coat, Miss Marple allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. The village carried on, oblivious to the subtleties she had observed, but she sensed a rhythm beneath the chaos, a pattern waiting to be understood. Somewhere, concealed among hushed whispers and unseen footsteps, lay the truth of the mysterious visitor. And Miss Marple, patient and perceptive as ever, intended to uncover it. Chapter 4: Festival and Footprints. Miss Marple had just settled into her favourite armchair, the morning sun filtering through lace curtains, when a small envelope was slipped silently under her door. The paper was cream-coloured and thick, the handwriting neat but unfamiliar, curling elegantly across the page. She lifted it carefully, sensing the weight of the words yet to be revealed. Setting aside her tea, she broke the seal, unfolding the letter with deliberate care. "Do not be deceived by appearances," it began. "The Witherspoon house is not as it seems. Watch closely, for what is hidden may reveal itself in unexpected ways. Tread carefully, and trust your observations." Miss Marple's eyebrows rose slightly. The tone was formal, almost urgent, yet there was no signature, no clue as to the author's identity. She read it again, savouring the cadence of each line, noting what was said and what was left unsaid. There was no threat, only a quiet insistence that she pay attention. It was, in essence, an invitation, cloaked in caution. Her mind immediately began to weigh the possibilities. Who could have known she would be attentive to the subtleties of the village? Someone local, certainly, yet cunning enough to disguise their hand. Perhaps a neighbour, privy to the comings and goings around the Witherspoon house? Or an entirely new arrival, someone watching the village from the edges, testing her perceptiveness. Each scenario had merit, each demanded careful consideration. She sipped her now cooling tea, her gaze drifting toward the window. The Witherspoon house remained distant and silent, its darkened windows staring back like unblinking eyes. The autumn leaves rustled in the breeze, and the village itself moved as if oblivious to the message that had arrived at her door. Yet she knew better. Small details often told larger stories, and a letter such as this could not have appeared without reason. Miss Marple's thoughts turned inward, reflecting on the villagers' recent chatter and the subtle inconsistencies she had observed. The anonymous letter hinted at more than simple curiosity. It suggested intent, deliberation, and perhaps hidden motives. Someone wanted her attention, someone who understood her reputation for quiet observation. She set the letter aside, considering her next steps. Observation, patience, and discretion would be her tools. The footprints in the garden, the faint lavender scent, the carefully placed objects around the house, they all might connect to this anonymous correspondent. The puzzle pieces were scattered, but they were not beyond assembly. Even as she pondered, A gentle knock at the window made her start slightly. Outside, nothing but the shifting shadows of trees and the glint of morning light on dew-soaked leaves. No one appeared, yet the moment reminded her that attention and caution were inseparable allies. Miss Marple returned to the letter once more, pressing it between her fingers. The handwriting, the phrasing, the very absence of a signature, all were clues in themselves. Whoever had sent this knew something that could unravel the mystery of the house where no one slept. And Miss Marple, calm and deliberate, resolved to follow the trail wherever it might lead. By late morning, Miss Marple decided it was time to seek first-hand accounts of the Witherspoon house from those who had lived near it for decades. Her first visit was to Mrs. Larkins, a kindly widow whose cottage backed onto the long-abandoned garden. The scent of dried herbs and baked bread drifted through the air as Miss Marple knocked gently. "Oh, Miss Marple, do come in," Mrs. Larkins said, her eyes bright but wary. "It's all so curious, isn't it? That house, it's never truly been empty, in my experience. Not when the Witherspoons lived here, and not after." Seated in the cosy sitting room, Miss Marple listened as Mrs. Larkins recounted fragments of village history. Arguments over inheritance, whispers of quarrels between distant relatives, and tales of fleeting visitors who vanished as quietly as they arrived, all painted a picture of intrigue that had lain dormant for years. The elderly neighbour's eyes twinkled as she recalled a candle flickering behind drawn curtains long after the household was supposedly gone. Miss Marple noted each small detail, aware that memory, while imperfect, often revealed more than people intended. "People used to talk, of course," Mrs. Larkins continued, lowering her voice. "They said that secrets were kept there, but nothing ever proved true. Some claimed treasures were hidden in the walls. Others whispered of letters never sent, of a love lost and a scandal hushed. Children dared each other to peek in, yet none stayed long enough to discover anything." Miss Marple's fingers traced the rim of her teacup, her mind connecting these snippets with recent observations. She thought of the anonymous letter, the footprints in the garden, and the flicker of shadows behind curtains. Village gossip, often dismissed as idle chatter, was in this case a mosaic of truth and embellishment, and Miss Marple had learned to discern the difference. Mrs. Larkins paused, glancing out the window toward the house. "I did see someone there the other evening," she admitted quietly, as if confessing a secret. "A figure moving across the garden, though I could not tell who. And I heard sounds, footsteps, a door opening, then silence." Miss Marple nodded, noting the subtle repetition. It matched the report she had gathered from other villagers, the small inconsistencies in timing, the occasional lapse of attention or memory. Each recollection, though incomplete, formed a pattern. The Witherspoon house was alive in ways the village preferred to ignore, its stories hidden behind layers of polite conversation and hushed warnings. As she rose to leave, Mrs. Larkins pressed a hand gently on Miss Marple's arm. "Do be careful, dear. Some things are better left unseen. But, if anyone can make sense of it, it is you." Outside, the sun had climbed higher, casting warm light over the village square. Miss Marple paused, letting the autumn breeze brush against her cheeks. She could feel the rhythm of the village beneath the chatter and the laughter, a pulse of life intertwined with secrecy. One neighbour's account, she realized, was only a part of a larger tapestry, threads of truth interwoven with conjecture. And yet, for all its subtlety, the story was becoming clearer. The Witherspoon house, with its shadows, whispers, and hidden footsteps, was no longer a forgotten relic. Someone was there, and the village, gentle and cosy though it seemed, held more than its share of secrets waiting to be uncovered. Chapter 5. Nighttime Observations. By mid-afternoon, the village square had transformed into a vibrant scene of autumn cheer. Stalls were lined with pumpkins, apple tarts, and woven baskets brimming with harvest fruits. Hay bales formed cozy seating, and ribbons fluttered above, stirred by a playful breeze. Children darted about, laughing, their cheeks bright with excitement. The smell of mulled cider mingled with the earthy aroma of fallen leaves. Miss Marple moved quietly among the festivalgoers, her sharp eyes noting faces, gestures, and the occasional nervous glance toward the Witherspoon house at the edge of the square. As she paused to admire a display of hand-stitched quilts, a sudden clamour arose. Mrs. Peters' voice rang out, sharp with alarm. "My prized silver candlestick, it's gone!" The stall, carefully arranged just moments before, now held an empty space where the ornate item had stood. Villagers gasped and murmured, glancing at one another with curiosity and suspicion. Mr. Higgins, ever excitable, ran from stall to stall, wringing his hands, while the vicar's calm voice attempted to restore order. Speculation spread as swiftly as the autumn wind. "It must be someone from that house," one villager whispered, eyes flicking toward the distant, silent windows of the Witherspoon residence. "Or perhaps a visitor passing through," suggested another, fanning herself with a napkin, her voice tinged with fear and fascination. Miss Marple listened attentively, as she always did, absorbing every nuance. She noted who spoke first, who hesitated, who seemed eager to redirect attention elsewhere. Moving discreetly among the crowd, Miss Marple observed small, telling details. A smear of soot on a sleeve, a fleeting glance toward the empty stall, and a nervous shuffle of feet, all hints, subtle but significant. The festival continued around the theft, cheerful laughter and music masking the tension beneath. The village, so accustomed to routine and gentle gossip, had been startled into a collective mystery. She approached the vicar, Reverend Barclay, who was quietly directing the younger villagers to help Mrs. Peters reorganize her display. "It seems the Witherspoon house has cast a shadow over even the merriest occasions," she remarked softly, making no accusation but noting his reaction. He merely smiled, his calm demeanor unshaken, yet a faint crease on his brow suggested he, too, was aware of the unspoken tensions the house brought. As the festival continued, Miss Marple considered the patterns emerging from the villagers' reactions. The missing candlestick was more than a simple theft. It was a signal, a thread connected to the mysteries of the house. Footprints leading from the square, traces of unfamiliar perfume, and whispered accounts hinted that the visitor at the house might already be among them. Even amidst laughter, music, and the glow of autumnal celebration, Miss Marple felt the familiar thrill of discovery. The festival's warmth, she realized, could not hide the subtle disturbances at its edges. The stolen item, though small, had unveiled a new layer of the mystery, and she knew it was only the beginning. For behind the cheerful bustle, the house where no one slept seemed to watch, patient and expectant, as if daring someone to uncover its secrets. As the late afternoon sun slanted across the cobblestones of St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple returned to the quieter lanes of the village, her mind still turning over the events of the festival. The chatter of the villagers had provided threads, some tangled, some remarkably clear, but she felt the need for another perspective, a fresh set of eyes. She did not have long to wait. At the corner near the old blacksmith forge, a young villager, Timothy Hawkes, hesitated before stepping forward. His hands were slightly calloused from farm work, yet his eyes held a sharp attentiveness that belied his youthful appearance. "Miss Marple," he said cautiously, lowering his voice, I think I noticed something at the Witherspoon house. Perhaps you would like to hear it." Miss Marple smiled warmly, gesturing for him to walk along with her. "I always welcome observations, Timothy. Sometimes the smallest detail can unravel the largest puzzle." His expression brightened, encouraged by her calm, patient demeanor. Timothy explained that during the festival he had noticed a figure moving silently along the garden path behind the Witherspoon house, careful to avoid the main street. The movement had been deliberate, measured, and unlike the random wanderings of children or farmhands. He described a faint glint of something metallic, a letter or a small object, that seemed to vanish quickly into the shadows. Miss Marple listened intently, her mind cataloguing every detail, noting how his story aligned with the footprints, the scents, and the fleeting shadows she had observed herself. They paused by a small, twisted oak at the edge of the Witherspoon garden. Miss Marple crouched slightly, inspecting the ground. There, partially hidden beneath a tangle of fallen leaves, lay a scrap of paper, timidly pressed into the soil, almost invisible to anyone less observant. Timothy's eyes widened in surprise. "I didn't notice that before," he admitted. Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully. "Curious, isn't it? Little pieces left as if to be discovered only by someone willing to look closely. Each fragment tells a story if one knows how to read it." She explained to Timothy how careful observation, patience, and the willingness to notice what others ignore were key to understanding the subtle choreography of the house. As they retraced their steps toward the village, Miss Marple encouraged Timothy to remain discreet. "Gossip could cloud judgment and mislead others," she explained. "The truth often hides where people least expect it," she said. "And those who observe quietly see what others miss entirely." Timothy, inspired and eager to assist, promised to keep watch and report anything unusual without alarming the village. Miss Marple appreciated his discretion, recognizing that sometimes an ally with fresh perspective could uncover connections her own experience alone might overlook. By the time they reached the village square, the festival had quieted, and lanterns began to glow along the streets. Miss Marple's mind was already weaving the new observations into her growing understanding of the house where no one slept. With Timothy's help, she felt the first threads of a pattern emerging, a pathway to uncovering not only who had returned to the house but why they had come. Chapter 6. The Key and the Stranger. The village had settled into quietude, the gentle hum of evening life replaced by the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant bark of a dog. Miss Marple wrapped her shawl tightly around her shoulders, the crisp autumn air nipping at her cheeks, and stepped softly along the cobblestone path toward the Witherspoon house. Lantern in hand, she moved with deliberate caution, each footfall measured, her sharp eyes scanning for the slightest disturbance in the shadows. The house loomed at the edge of the square, its darkened windows staring like unblinking eyes. The garden, overgrown with brambles and autumn leaves, whispered of neglect, but now hinted at recent activity. Miss Marple noted footprints that led from the gate to a side door, impressions of different sizes and depths suggesting more than one visitor. She crouched to inspect them, feeling the chill of damp earth beneath her gloved hands. As she moved closer, a faint light flickered behind a curtained window. Candlelight, or perhaps a lantern, cast long, trembling shadows against the walls. Miss Marple's mind catalogued the possibilities. A visitor seeking shelter, a secretive tenant, or perhaps a mischief-maker taking advantage of the village's curiosity. Each scenario carried its own set of subtle signs, and she observed them all with the patience of someone accustomed to quiet revelations. She circled the perimeter, noting the condition of the side door. Its lock was old but recently oiled. The hinges creaked faintly when nudged, betraying careful maintenance. The faintest scent of lavender drifted on the evening breeze, a domestic hint that suggested the house was being occupied with deliberate attention. Miss Marple's thoughts traced the patterns of the footprints, the placement of fallen leaves, and the whisper of movement within. Each detail was a clue, waiting for careful assembly. From a small alcove behind a twisted oak, she glimpsed a shadow flit across a window, vanishing before she could discern its features. Her pulse quickened, not with fear but with the familiar thrill of a mystery unfolding under her observation. She noted the subtle changes: a curtain drawn tighter, a faint creak in the floorboards, the rhythmic tapping of what might have been a hand or the edge of furniture. These were not random occurrences, they were deliberate, signaling presence and intent. Miss Marple retreated slightly, keeping herself hidden in the garden's shadows. She allowed the house's sounds to wash over her, the faint rustle of movement, the gentle sigh of the wind against the panes, the soft click of a latch somewhere within. She understood that patience was her greatest ally. The house, like a careful storyteller, revealed only what it wished to, in its own measured tempo. Returning to the edge of the square, she paused beneath a lantern, allowing the glow to illuminate the cobblestones. The village slept, oblivious to the subtle narrative unfolding at its periphery. Yet Miss Marple knew that every creak, every flicker of light, and every shadow held meaning. The Witherspoon house, long dormant, had quietly awakened. And she, ever observant, would be the one to uncover its secrets, piece by meticulous piece. The following morning brought a soft drizzle over St. Mary Mead, the cobblestones glistening and reflecting the muted grey of the autumn sky. Miss Marple wrapped herself in her shawl and stepped out, umbrella in hand, to fetch her morning post. The village was quieter than usual, dampened by the rain, but a subtle tension lingered, as though the Witherspoon house cast a shadow even on days of ordinary weather. At the small post office, she noticed a peculiar parcel resting among the letters. It was unmarked, wrapped in plain brown paper, tied with string, and without a return address. The postmistress looked flustered, whispering to herself as she adjusted the stack. "Strange things have been arriving for that house lately," she murmured, lowering her voice when Miss Marple approached. Curiosity piqued, Miss Marple accepted the parcel and carefully examined it. Its weight was light, but its contents seemed intentionally concealed, as though the sender wanted it to reach the house unnoticed. The wrapping bore faint smudges, perhaps from hurried hands, and the string had been tied with a slightly unconventional knot. She smiled softly. These small anomalies were often the most revealing. Walking past the Witherspoon house on her way home, Miss Marple paused near the gate, pretending to adjust her umbrella while observing the windows. For a moment, nothing stirred. Then, the curtains twitched, a subtle but deliberate movement, as though someone inside had noticed the parcel's arrival and reacted. The thought that someone was actively monitoring deliveries made her mind race through possibilities. Was it a confidant, a secretive resident, or someone with intentions less than friendly? At her cottage, she placed the parcel on the table and set about examining it more closely. With gentle, deliberate movements, she untied the string and unfolded the paper. Inside lay a small notebook, its cover plain and unassuming. Flipping through it, she found pages filled with careful handwriting, recording observations, names, and times, details unmistakably linked to the Witherspoon house and its surroundings. The entries suggested vigilance, an almost obsessive attentiveness, yet also a deliberate attempt to remain unseen. Miss Marple noted the subtle clues, the handwriting style, the ink, and the precise manner of notation. The notebook spoke of an outsider or perhaps a resident deliberately cataloguing events, footsteps, deliveries, and even the movements of villagers who might approach the house. It was a curious blend of observation and secrecy, written with purpose but without context. As she pondered, a faint tapping at the window drew her attention. The garden was empty, but the shadows shifted, and the wind stirred the branches near the gate. Someone had been watching, or perhaps even waiting, for her to discover the parcel. Miss Marple's mind began to weave together the strands: the anonymous letter, Eleanor's arrival, the shadows and footprints, and now this mysterious delivery. Each element hinted at a carefully orchestrated presence in the house. And though the notebook revealed careful observation, it left a pressing question unanswered. Who was recording these details, and what was the ultimate purpose behind their secrecy? The Witherspoon house, shrouded in autumn mist and village gossip, seemed to pulse with hidden intentions. And Miss Marple, sipping her now cooling tea, resolved to uncover every subtle clue, knowing that the truth often hid in plain sight, waiting for a patient, perceptive eye. Chapter 7. Resolution and Confession. By early evening, a pale amber light settled over St. Mary Mead, filtering through the mist that clung to the village rooftops. Miss Marple found herself walking toward the churchyard, the familiar comfort of stone walls and tidy flower beds lending a sense of calm. Reverend Berkeley emerged from the vicarage, umbrella in hand, and greeted her with a warm smile that hinted at shared confidence. "Miss Marple," he began, lowering his voice slightly, "I wondered if I might share an observation regarding the Witherspoon house. It seems that someone, or perhaps more than one, has been moving quietly about the property. I noticed it as I walked past yesterday evening." Miss Marple inclined her head, inviting him to continue. His eyes, calm and reflective, held the careful attention of someone accustomed to noticing subtle rhythms in life. He explained that he had seen lights flicker behind curtains in ways inconsistent with wind or candle drafts, and shadows that suggested deliberate movement rather than random activity. "It is faint," he admitted, "almost imperceptible unless one is looking for it. But there is something deliberate about it." Together, they strolled along the edge of the square, speaking quietly. The autumn wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of damp leaves and wood smoke. Miss Marple listened intently, comparing his account with the footprints, faint scents, and unusual noises she had observed. Reverend Berkeley added that he had noted unusual patterns in the villagers' behavior, small hesitations or glances toward the house, as though they, too, sensed something out of the ordinary. "I suspect," he said thoughtfully, "that the person, or people, in the house are acutely aware of the villagers' attention. Every movement is measured, and every signal, however subtle, seems intended to be noticed by the observant few." Miss Marple smiled, her mind already weaving his observations into the intricate tapestry she had been constructing. "Indeed, Reverend. Patterns are everything. Even the smallest gestures can reveal the presence of someone attentive, careful, and perhaps deliberately secretive. One must only learn to read them." They paused near the garden path of the Witherspoon house. From a shadowed window, the curtains shifted slightly, catching the last light of day. Both Miss Marple and Reverend Berkeley exchanged a glance, silent acknowledgment that the house's occupants were watching, perhaps even aware of their scrutiny. Before parting ways, the vicar offered a quiet warning: "Do proceed carefully, Miss Marple. I sense that curiosity may uncover more than we expect, and yet I trust your judgment implicitly." Miss Marple nodded, appreciative of his discretion. She returned home with her thoughts deep and layered, considering how the vicar's observations meshed with Eleanor Hawthorne's arrival, the anonymous letter, and the mysterious notebook. Patterns were emerging, delicate yet undeniable, hinting that the Witherspoon house was the centre of careful orchestration. As night fell over St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple stood by her window, gazing at the house where no one slept. Shadows moved behind drawn curtains, and the quiet pulse of the village hinted at secrets waiting to be revealed. With the vicar's insights added to her own meticulous observations, she sensed that the threads of this mystery were drawing closer to being unravelled, and that the answers were just beginning to stir. The following morning dawned crisp and clear, the sun casting long golden rays across St. Mary Mead's cobblestones. Miss Marple had just poured her morning tea when a carriage rattled up the lane, stopping abruptly near the Witherspoon house. From it stepped a stranger, tall and impeccably dressed, his coat dusted with morning dew. The villagers paused mid-task, exchanging curious glances, as whispers began to ripple through the square. Miss Marple observed from her window, noting the stranger's deliberate pace and careful surveying of the surroundings. He carried himself with quiet authority, yet there was an almost nervous attentiveness in the way he scanned the street and the edges of the village. It was immediately clear that he was not a local, and that his arrival was tied, in some way, to the mysteries surrounding the abandoned house. Villagers speculated eagerly, voices laced with excitement and a touch of fear. "Perhaps he is a relative of the Witherspoons," one exclaimed, clutching a basket of apples. "Or a lawyer, sent to settle the inheritance," suggested another, eyes wide. Mr. Higgins, ever excitable, dashed from the inn, hat in hand, trying to gain a glimpse of the newcomer without appearing too intrusive. Miss Marple, however, noted the stranger's small, telling gestures, the way he paused to examine the gate, the careful manner in which he avoided eye contact with passers-by, and the faint scent of leather and tobacco clinging to his coat. Deciding to investigate, Miss Marple strolled through the square, keeping her distance yet maintaining a clear view. The stranger's attention seemed to be fixed on the Witherspoon house itself. He circled the perimeter slowly, checking locks, peering briefly through windows, and taking note of small disturbances in the garden soil. Each movement was deliberate, measured, and precise, far from the random curiosity of a tourist. As she approached, Miss Marple overheard snippets of his conversation with a local delivery boy, spoken in a clipped, careful tone. He inquired about recent arrivals at the house, unusual deliveries, and the daily routines of the villagers. Every question, polite though it appeared, seemed calculated to gather information without raising suspicion. Miss Marple made a mental note of his demeanour, confident, observant, yet slightly tense, as though he feared being watched. The stranger's presence added a new layer of complexity to the already enigmatic situation. Could he be the mysterious observer responsible for the anonymous letter and the detailed notebook? Or was he a new player entirely, with intentions unknown and perhaps more urgent? As he finally stepped away from the house, blending into the village streets, Miss Marple felt the familiar stir of intrigue. The Witherspoon house, long dormant, had drawn yet another visitor, someone purposeful and discreet. The threads of the mystery were multiplying, and with each new arrival, the picture grew richer, more intricate, and more compelling. And as she returned to her cottage, a chill breeze rustled the autumn leaves, carrying with it the unspoken question that had begun to echo in her mind. Who was this stranger, and what secret did he seek to uncover in the house where no one slept? The village had fallen into a hushed lull, the fading glow of lanterns casting pools of amber across the damp cobblestones. Miss Marple, ever attentive, sat by her window with a steaming cup of tea, the flickering firelight dancing across her thoughtful face. Outside, the streets were quiet, yet her keen eyes remained fixed on the Witherspoon house, alert to every subtle shift of shadow or movement behind its long-closed curtains. Around midnight, a soft rustling drew her attention. From the corner of her eye, she caught a faint glow emanating from a side window. It pulsed briefly, like a candle being shifted, then disappeared. Footsteps followed, deliberate, light, and careful, crossing the gravel path in the garden. Miss Marple's lips pressed into a thin line. Someone was inside, someone moving with caution and purpose. She wrapped herself in a shawl and stepped quietly into the night, making her way along a side path that allowed her a closer view without drawing notice. The autumn air was cool, carrying the scent of wet leaves and distant chimney smoke. Her footsteps barely disturbed the fallen foliage as she crept closer to the edge of the house. The garden gate creaked faintly under the weight of the wind, or perhaps someone had tested it. Miss Marple's trained eyes picked out footprints in the soft soil, overlapping and layered, suggesting more than one person had passed through recently. A scarf, faintly scented with lavender, lay partially hidden beneath a shrub, matching a scent she had noticed days before. Each small detail added to the growing tapestry of subtle evidence. Then, a shadow moved across the window again, pausing briefly as if scanning the garden. Miss Marple ducked behind a low hedge, heart steady but mind alert. She could see a figure inside, bending over something on a table, a notebook, perhaps, or letters, and then retreating quietly, leaving behind a faint shimmer of candlelight. The movements were deliberate, almost ritualistic, and hinted at meticulous observation rather than haste or panic. From this vantage, she noted the smallest details: the way curtains were adjusted to allow light without revealing the occupant, the careful placement of objects on the windowsill, even the rhythm of the footsteps as if rehearsed. It was clear that whoever occupied the house was not merely hiding. They were monitoring, cataloguing, and perhaps orchestrating events in the village below. Miss Marple withdrew quietly, retracing her steps to the warmth and safety of her cottage. Her mind, however, remained in the garden, analyzing every shadow, every faint sound. The house where no one slept had not only awakened, it was actively engaged in a quiet, careful dance, leaving traces for the perceptive to follow. As she sipped her tea once more, she felt the familiar thrill of anticipation. The pieces of the puzzle were multiplying, and tonight had revealed new patterns in the shadows. Someone was watching, someone was planning, and Miss Marple knew that patience, observation, and gentle deduction would soon uncover the story behind the silent, mysterious house. Chapter 7. The Truth Revealed. The morning after the night of shadows, St. Mary Mead was bathed in soft, golden sunlight that filtered through the turning leaves of autumn. Miss Marple, tea in hand, made her way quietly toward the Witherspoon garden. The village was beginning its usual routine: children laughing, shopkeepers arranging displays, and the faint scent of baking bread drifting through the air, but her attention was fixed firmly on the ground, the hedges, and the delicate disturbances that suggested someone had been active while the village slept. The garden gate, slightly ajar, bore faint marks of careful handling. Miss Marple crouched to examine the soil beneath, discovering footprints of varying sizes pressed into the damp earth. One set was small and delicate, likely a woman's, and the other larger, heavier, and more deliberate. Each footprint told a story. Weight distribution, direction, and purposefulness suggested measured movement rather than random wandering. A thin scarf, partially hidden under bramble, carried the faintest hint of lavender, a detail she had noted before, a signature of the mysterious occupant's presence. Nearby, a notebook lay slightly open, pages ruffled by the breeze. Though it had clearly been left unattended, Its contents were meticulous: observations of the village, careful sketches of paths, and cryptic notes about timing and routine. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled with curiosity. This was not the work of a casual visitor, but of someone deliberate, methodical, and intent on gathering information. She moved slowly along the garden path, noting small signs others might dismiss. A bird feeder had been recently adjusted, disturbed leaves marked subtle movement, and a faint scent of citrus lingered where none should be. Even the placement of fallen apples on the ground suggested an awareness of positioning and attention to detail, perhaps to mark time or signal events. From the far corner of the garden, a sudden rustle drew her attention. A cat, grey and sleek, darted from behind the hedge, disappearing into the morning shadows. Miss Marple smiled gently. Even the smallest inhabitants of the village played a part in the rhythm of observation. Nature itself, she reflected, often added its own layer of subtlety to the stories she uncovered. She carefully recorded each discovery in her notebook, comparing it with previous observations: the anonymous letter, the notebook delivered in secret, Timothy's sightings, and the stranger who had appeared at the village edge. A pattern began to emerge, delicate yet undeniable. The Witherspoon house was not merely occupied, it was alive with intention. Each object, footprint, and sent a deliberate message, waiting for the perceptive eye. As she stood to leave, a movement behind the main window caught her attention. The curtains shifted ever so slightly, and a shadow passed by, fleeting and deliberate. Someone was watching, or perhaps aware that they were being observed. Miss Marple's heart quickened with quiet satisfaction. The garden, once a forgotten patch of overgrowth, had become a repository of clues. And as the village hummed with daytime activity, Miss Marple knew that each subtle sign she uncovered brought her closer to understanding the secret behind the house where no one slept, and the intentions of the mysterious visitor within. By late morning, a dense mist had settled over St. Mary Mead, curling around the corners of cottages and softening the edges of the village square. Miss Marple, wrapped in her shawl, made her way toward the Witherspoon house with a purpose. The events of the previous days, the anonymous letter, the notebook, the stranger's arrival, and the subtle movements in the garden had created a tapestry of small but telling details. Today, she hoped, might reveal another thread. As she approached the garden gate, she noticed immediately that something was different. The latch, which had previously clicked into place with careful precision, now hung slightly ajar. Her sharp eyes scanned the surrounding soil and grass. Footprints led away from the gate, small and hurried, overlapping the more deliberate impressions she had noted before. And then, almost hidden beneath a scattering of autumn leaves, she found it, a small, brass key, its surface dulled with age but unmistakably functional. Miss Marple picked it up, turning it over in her gloved fingers. The key was old, possibly belonging to a side door or cupboard in the Witherspoon house. It was not lost accidentally. Its placement, partially covered yet still noticeable to a careful observer, suggested deliberate intention. Someone had left it, perhaps as a test, a signal, or a clue to be discovered. She felt the familiar thrill of uncovering something hidden, the first tangible piece of evidence that could open a door, both literally and figuratively. She returned to the village square, notebook in hand, cataloguing the find. The brass key connected to previous observations, the careful footprints in the garden, the shadowy figure in the window, and the meticulous entries in the mysterious notebook. Someone within the house was orchestrating events with precision, yet small slips, like this key, provided insight into their identity or motives. Miss Marple paused near the bakery, where the scent of warm bread mingled with the crisp autumn air. She shared her discovery in quiet confidence with Timothy Hawkes, who had become her vigilant ally. His eyes widened with excitement as she explained the implications. Together, they considered where the key might fit, what it might unlock, and how it could connect to the recent deliveries and letters. As they spoke, a figure emerged from the mist near the edge of the square, a stranger passing quickly, glancing nervously toward the Witherspoon house. Miss Marple noted the tension in the man's shoulders and the deliberate care of his movements. Whoever had lost, or left, the key was aware of the village's watchful eyes, yet their caution had not prevented this small but telling oversight. Returning home, Miss Marple carefully examined the key under the warm glow of her lamp. Its intricate teeth suggested an old lock, possibly a hidden compartment, a forgotten drawer, or a door long unused. The mystery deepened. The Witherspoon house was no longer a simple curiosity. It had become a puzzle of deliberate actions, small clues, and carefully concealed secrets. As the evening shadows stretched across her cottage, she placed the key gently beside her notebook. One small object, innocuous to an unobservant eye, had revealed volumes. And now, with the key in hand, Miss Marple knew that the next stage of discovery, one step closer to the heart of the mystery, was imminent. The evening air in St. Mary Mead was crisp and fragrant with the scent of burning logs. Inside her cosy cottage, Miss Marple sat by the fire, the brass key resting on her table alongside the notebook and carefully catalogued observations. The village had returned to its quiet rhythms, yet an undercurrent of tension lingered, subtle but undeniable, like the first notes of a distant melody. Tonight, she sensed, the mystery might finally begin to reveal itself. A soft knock at the door startled her only slightly. Her intuition had already prepared her for an unexpected visitor. Opening it, she found Eleanor Hawthorne, the young woman who had recently arrived in the village. Her face was pale, and her hands fidgeted with the hem of her coat. "Miss Marple," she began hesitantly, "I suppose there's no point in hiding it any longer. I wanted to explain about the house, and everything that's happened." Inviting Eleanor inside, Miss Marple gestured to a chair near the fire. The young woman sank into it, the flickering flames illuminating her nervous features. Eleanor spoke quickly at first, recounting her reasons for returning to the Witherspoon house. She had inherited it unexpectedly, a legacy from a distant relative, and had chosen to remain discreet while assessing the property and settling matters privately. The anonymous letters, the careful notebook, and the small movements in the garden were all part of her efforts to understand the house's condition and to avoid drawing unnecessary attention. Miss Marple listened, her eyes calm and attentive, occasionally asking gentle questions to clarify minor inconsistencies. The brass key, she realized, had been left intentionally by Eleanor as a test of her perceptiveness, a small measure of trust toward anyone observant enough to notice it. Each detail, the footprints, the subtle scents, and the flickering shadows, had been orchestrated not out of malice but caution and a desire to remain unnoticed until matters were resolved. Eleanor paused, her voice trembling slightly. "I didn't mean to frighten anyone," she said. "I only wanted to keep the village at peace while I arranged things. But perhaps I underestimated the curiosity and the observant eyes of certain villagers." Miss Marple smiled gently. The young woman's candour, combined with her careful actions, confirmed that the mystery was not sinister but layered, deliberate, and human. As they spoke, the warmth of the fire and the comforting aroma of tea created a safe space for honesty. The subtle threads of the village's gossip, the shadows of the house, and the meticulous clues all fell into place. Miss Marple realized that what had seemed threatening was, in fact, an intricate puzzle of observation, intention, and discretion. By the time Eleanor rose to leave, a sense of resolution had settled over the room. The brass key, the notebook, and the careful surveillance had been explained, the mystery revealed not through confrontation or scandal but through quiet confession. Miss Marple, ever perceptive, had anticipated much, yet the final pieces had required Eleanor's own voice. As the young woman stepped out into the cool night, Miss Marple watched the mist curl around the cobblestones and felt the familiar satisfaction of discovery. The village was at peace once more, the house where no one slept no longer a source of unease, and the quiet mysteries of St. Mary Mead had, for now, been gently resolved. The following morning, St. Mary Mead awoke to the gentle glow of autumn sunlight spilling across the cobblestone streets. There was a renewed sense of calm in the village, the usual bustle carrying an undercurrent of satisfaction and quiet relief. Shopkeepers arranged their displays with cheerful precision, the church bells rang harmoniously, and the aroma of freshly baked bread drifted from the bakery, welcoming villagers into the day with a comforting normalcy. Miss Marple strolled slowly through the square, savouring the crisp air and the soft rustle of leaves underfoot. She exchanged warm greetings with familiar faces, the postmistress, the innkeeper, and even Mr. Higgins, who was cheerfully recounting the tale of the mysterious stranger to anyone willing to listen. Though everyone spoke with amusement rather than suspicion, Miss Marple's sharp eyes noted subtle nods and fleeting glances toward the Witherspoon house, indicating that the village's curiosity had not entirely faded. Approaching the house, she observed its quiet elegance now restored. Curtains hung evenly in the windows, the garden gate closed securely, and the faint scent of lavender still lingered, a gentle reminder of the occupant's presence. Eleanor Hawthorne had settled in, handling her inheritance with grace and discretion, ensuring that the house no longer cast shadows of mystery over the village. Miss Marple allowed herself a small smile. The house had awakened, but not to chaos or scandal. It had awakened to careful stewardship, quietly observed and understood by a few perceptive eyes. As she made her way to the bakery, she reflected on the events that had unfolded, the anonymous letters, the notebook left as a puzzle, the stranger in the village, and the late-night shadows. Each clue, each observation, had been a piece of a delicate puzzle, requiring patience, attention, and an understanding of human nature to assemble. The thrill of discovery, she mused, was not in dramatic revelations but in the quiet unravelling of subtle truths, the kind that left the village intact yet wiser. Over tea and scones, Miss Marple conversed with Timothy Hawkes, who had been an invaluable observer throughout the mystery. Together, they recounted the clues, the footprints, and the small gestures that had led to understanding. Their discussion was light, punctuated with gentle laughter, the warmth of camaraderie, and the satisfaction of a mystery resolved without fear or harm. By late afternoon, the village had returned fully to its gentle rhythm. Children played along the lanes, villagers exchanged cheerful gossip, and the Witherspoon house stood serene at the edge of the square, its mysteries laid bare but its secrets treated with discretion. Miss Marple paused by her window, gazing at the cottage with the quiet contentment of someone who had observed carefully, understood deeply, and allowed the truth to unfold naturally. As church bells tolled and the sun dipped toward the horizon, she poured herself a final cup of tea and reflected on the subtle joys of St. Mary Mead, the calm, the warmth, the gentle unfolding of human stories, and the satisfaction of a mystery solved not with haste or spectacle, but with patience, observation, and quiet wisdom. The village was at peace, and the house where no one slept had finally found its place among the gentle rhythms of everyday life. Ah, dear friends, thank you ever so much for staying with me all the way to the end of Miss Marple and the Hidden Will. It has been such a delight to wander through St. Mary Mead together, uncovering whispers and secrets, and sharing a cup of tea in the quiet of the village. I do hope you enjoyed the gentle unravelling of our little mystery, and if a thought or two has stirred in your mind, do leave a word in the comments. It would be a joy to hear from you. If this cosy little tale warmed your heart, a like is always most appreciated, and subscribing will ensure you'll be the very first to join us on the next enchanting stroll through a Miss Marple mystery. Until then, may your evenings be serene, your tea warm, and your curiosity ever bright.